came from Victor, who is a mediocre blue belt, self-proclaimed mediocre blue belt. I didn't call him that. I don't want you guys to think I'm being hateful towards the guy. But he's a self-proclaimed mediocre blue belt, and he's going to his gym right now in the morning classes. And in his morning classes currently, when he walks into the gym, it's a mat full of purple belts and up, right? Just tons of purple belts and then some other higher belts. And so when he's going in there right now, his success rate is super low because he's not going to, hit a lot of the techniques, and he's not going to win the rolls when he's up against all these people that are better than him. And he said it's really getting him discouraged. He says that in some cases he skips training, which he knows is counterproductive, but his motivation to go into the gym and get smashed is just not there. And then he says that in some cases, he's been sort of toying around with the idea of quitting. It just keeps popping up in his head. And he says he knows what the reason is, and I'm going to read him verbatim. He says, I know what's going on. I understand how this process works. I just don't know how to fix it. The way you keep someone in the loop is to give them a roughly 30 to 40% success rate. That's a psychological fact. You're not interested if you're always winning, and you're not interested if you're always losing. So how do you stay in the loop under these circumstances? Thank you. So, brother, thank you for the question. And man, when I was reading your message, you were talking about winning and success and all that stuff. And I think what would be useful to you is to maybe rethink what you mean by success or failure, what you mean by winning and losing. So for instance, when I first started training in jiu-jitsu, that was probably the time where I was in the exact same situation as you. I come in, and by the way, you guys have to understand how jiu-jitsu was, at least in most places back then. You walked into the gym, there were no beginner classes in a lot of cases, there was no onboarding, there was no like leading you up and building you up. It was basically sink or swim. My very first day I come in and I get knee barred, right? As a white belt who doesn't know much of anything. Luckily I had watched enough video and things like that I kind of knew what a knee bar was, but I got caught in knee bars and chokes and everything else. Completely obliterated. And when I first came in, it was very hard to get new students. The marketing and stuff like that wasn't there. So really nobody knew what it was for the most part. So when you were the bottom person on the totem pole, you sort of stayed there for a while because it was going to be a long time before someone else came in. And so for a long time, I spent sort of the time being the guy that just was the worst one on the mat. And when I would come in, I would get smashed by everybody. There was no chance of me submitting anyone. There was no chance of me winning, other than against my buddies who had started at the same time as me. But, again, everyone else I rolled with, I got smashed by. What I did to make it during that time period to kind of make it more fun for me, or at least I did this, I didn't really think about this. I just sort of thought about it like this, I guess you will. I knew I wasn't going to win. I knew these guys had more experience than me, but I still wanted to make progress and I still wanted to improve. So what I started doing is making little goals for myself. So for instance, when I was on top inside someone's guard, as a wrestler, sometimes I could take people down. But I remember when I would get on top of them, I would get caught in submissions, left and right triangle chokes, arm bars, everything else. And so my goal started off as just don't get submitted as many times as you did yesterday. So maybe they submitted me 10 times yesterday, maybe I submitted 5 times today. Boom, that was a win for me that day. And then it sort of worked itself up to the point where, all right, I'm rolling with this guy. My goal is just don't get submitted. So I would sit there and stall and hug his hips and everything else while I was inside of his guard, be a complete boring staller. But I didn't get submitted, so that was a win, right? Very small victories. And when I started playing off of my back more as a sort of better white belt, I started playing from the guard position. I remember my guard was terrible. And I would get smashed. So early on, my goal with guard became opening my guard, going for a submission, and if it failed, which it always failed, I would reclose my guard up and then pull the person back in. And being able to open and close, and not get my guard passed, that was a win for me. And even later on, my goal became just don't get my guard passed at all. So if I was rolling with someone, I would sometimes just lock them up in my guard and control them. And if they didn't pass my guard, that was a win. And when I was going up against my coach, who was a purple belt at the time, I knew I wasn't going to beat that dude. He was going to crush me. But if I could get him off balance a little bit, or if I could sort of make him sweat a certain amount, where you could, when you roll with someone, you can really tell when they're going. So I was like, if I could get him to do that, that was a win. Or if, for instance, if I was rolling with him and maybe I knocked him off balance or something, that was a win. So again, little victories that again were useful. They're sort of the building blocks of making something big happen, but they're little victories. And I still use this idea to this day, even as a black belt, because I still have to remember, like when, for instance, when I go to a new position or a new technique, the failure rate with a new position, something that's very different from my game now, is very high. And so what I'll do is I'll start to like break that down into like little goals, right? Like just, if I can just hit this one thing, it'll be better, right? If I can get, like, here's a great example. When I was working on as a purple belt, when I was working on adding more butterfly guard into my game, it would be, if I got to butterfly guard, that was a win. I might get wrecked and smashed afterwards, but if I could get there, that was a win. Afterwards, it became, can I hold the position for a little bit? And then it became going to the sweeps and everything else. So I start with those little small things, and I still do this to this day. And it's even, on a sort of a side related tangent, it's even like the business stuff, right? When I first started doing some of this online business stuff and even like YouTube videos, I remember I turned on AdSense, right? Like on YouTube, and I was thinking, oh man, the money's just gonna come rolling in, right? And I made like $5 one day, and I thought it was like, you know, it was very little, but it was exciting because I made like $5. Even though I spent like hours making the video, hey, I made $5. So again, it was a little victory for me. And so again, going back to you, again, you're in a situation right now where you cannot change the circumstances, you can't change the environment, you can't change the skills that the people have around you. So you got to change your perspective a little bit. You got to look at things a little bit differently, where instead of thinking I've got to smash and dominate these people, or I've got to hit these techniques and submit these people, you got to think of it as, what's a little victory that I could have on one of these people? Maybe it's rolling with one of those tough guys and not getting your guard smashed or not getting submitted. Maybe you get up into a little ball and you just survive the whole time. Boom, that's a win. And if you do that, if you break down those little victories, if you basically focus on those little things that you can do, I think that you'll have a little bit more enjoyment out of the training, because one, you're accepting the fact that you're going to get submitted. You know, go back to that white belt mentality when you first started. You're a blue belt now, so you've had a taste of the good life. You've probably gotten a little bit better. Go back to that white belt mentality where you said, you know what? I'm going to get smashed today, but what's something I can do that could maybe move the needle a little bit for me? Can I survive? Can I not get submitted as, 6 times instead of, 10 times or whatever? But whatever you can do, little victories for yourself. And I think if you redefine the way that you're measuring your success and your failure on the mat and the wins and the losses, I think it'll be a much better way to look at it, a much better perspective for your training in the current situation. So Victor and anyone else that's in Victor's situation, I hope that's useful to you. And guys, I'll talk to you next time.